it's my pleasure, my distinct pleasure, to tell you we have a special treat this evening in our speaker, Dr. Fran Pilch. I've known Fran since I started serving on the board at the World Affairs Council, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, however long that was. Fran at the time was the Vice President of Programs, and I think she did the best job as the Vice President of Programs we ever had, and we'd love to have her come back. But she served on the board. She was the VP of Programs. She's a professor at the Air Force Academy, and I think, as you know, she just finished a Fulbright Scholarship program in Mongolia, and that's the subject this evening. But she's also been a Fulbright Scholar, I believe, to South Africa. She has a PhD from Yale University, and she's very active in the community. So Fran is just a wonderful person, very supportive of what goes on in the community. She holds an annual fundraising soiree for different charities that I've attended, and so we really appreciate all that you do, Fran. The other thing I should brag about is that Fran initiated 6 years ago an international students reception, which welcomes students attending Colorado College, UCCS, Air Force Academy, at a little reception at the Penrose House, El Pomar, and we just had that last Saturday. We had about 25 countries represented, about 75 students. It's a wonderful event to meet all these young, interesting people from around the world. Mayor Bach speaks, Bill Hybl speaks, and Fran gave a wonderful introduction as well. So I'm going to stop talking, turn the program over to Fran, and let her go. Thank you very much, Fran.
Thank you. This is like old home week for me. I'm just so pleased to see all my old friends and new friends as well. And I have to tell you all, I did not have a glass of wine because I learned an invaluable lesson when I was the vice chairman of programs. We were hosting Admiral Keating. I think Curtis knows this story. And I almost never have a glass of wine, but for some reason, someone offered a free one that day, so I did. And I got up there and was introducing him, and he had all these security guards everywhere. He's this really big, important person. And I said, and now let's give a warm welcome to Admiral, and I couldn't remember his name. And I mean, it was so darn obvious. And finally, this Secret Service guy behind me just started whispering, Keating, Keating. So I didn't have a glass of wine tonight. But what I do want to do to start off with is, do you all know what, I'm a teacher, so what do teachers do? They give tests, right? So we are going to start with a quiz on Mongolia, and I'm going to pass out, I'll have Larry pass these out, and there's actually a prize. And I think there's a gentleman here who's been to Mongolia 6 times. Where's he? I was talking to him. You're not allowed to take it. Okay, there are 15 questions. And you have to keep track of how many you get right, and the person who gets the most right, and I hope there's just one, wins a wonderful prize. It's not this doll, though. I'm not going to give away this doll. So the first question is, which of the following countries is the largest landlocked country in the world? Mongolia, Kazakhstan, or Afghanistan? Number 2, what percentage of Mongolia's population lives in urban areas? Is it 32%, 46%, or 56%? Number 3, what is the most polluted city in the world? Ulaanbaatar or Ahvaz, Iran? Ulaanbaatar, I should teach you all this. It's Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar, UB. That's the capital of Mongolia. Ahvaz is Ahfaz. Okay. Number 4. What is the coldest capital city in the world? Is it Ulaanbaatar, Moscow, or Reykjavik? Okay, number 5. Are you all guessing? Having fun guessing? In 1921, Mongolia celebrated its independence. From whom? Now here's like a softball right down the middle, number 6. In what century did the great Chinggis Khan create his empire? And by the way, they know immediately if you're a foreigner, if you say Genghis Khan, it's Chinggis Khan. Chinggis Khan. Number 7. How are we doing? Number 7. What was the birth name of Chinggis Khan? Almost halfway through. Number 8. The president of Mongolia is particularly worried about the loss of these items from Mongolian soil. Number 9. What is the literacy rate in Mongolia? Is it 72%, 88%, or 97%? Okay, here comes an interesting question. I think some of you will get this. No? What is the Mongolian name for the round houses that Mongolians live in? Okay, next. Number 11. Who is the author of Chinggis Khan and the Making of the Modern World? This book reached number 1 on the New York Times best-selling nonfiction list about a couple of years ago. 12. What percentage of Mongolia's exports go to China? You got 4 choices here. Is it 60%, 82%, 92%, or 98%? 3 more questions. Finally, what was the Mongolian economic growth rate of their gross national product last year? Was it 8%, 12%, or 17%? True or false? The national drink of Mongolia is vodka. And finally, what percentage of Mongolians' petroleum products come from Russia? 50%, 80%, or 100%? All righty, you ready to score yourselves? How many of you think you did spectacularly? Okay. Which of the following countries is the largest landlocked country in the world? Mongolia, Kazakhstan, or Afghanistan? How many said Mongolia? How many said Kazakhstan? How many said Afghanistan? The answer is Kazakhstan. Mongolia is the 2nd largest landlocked country in the world. Number 2, what percentage of Mongolia's population lives in urban areas? Is it 32%, 46%, or 56%? How many of you said 32%? How many of you said 46%? How many of you said 56%? It is 56%. That's a surprise, isn't it? Yeah, Mongolia has a terrible problem with urbanization, very rapid urbanization. I'll tell you why when we look at the pictures. What is the most polluted city in the world? Is it Ulaanbaatar or Ahvaz? How many said Ulaanbaatar? How many said Ahvaz? The answer is Ahvaz. These are trick questions, aren't they? You think it's a talk about Mongolia, so all the answers are going to be Mongolia. Mongolia is the most polluted country in the world by particulates in the air, but as far as the city goes, Ahvaz wins. What is the coldest capital city in the world? Is it Ulaanbaatar, Moscow, or Reykjavik? How many of you think Ulaanbaatar? How many of you think Moscow? How many of you think Reykjavik? The answer is Ulaanbaatar. Just as an aside, when I stepped off the airplane in February, on February 1st, not last year, it was this year, February 1st, it was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stayed at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit until April. And it was so cold that I can't even describe how cold it was. It was like hitting a wall. You walked out, and you know, it's so funny because I lived about 20 minutes away from my school, and I had to walk to that school, and the sidewalks were just completely have any snow clearing or ice clearing at all. And I was terrified that I was going to fall. I never actually did fall. But when I'd walk out and I couldn't see anything, and I'd think, why the heck can't I see? And then I'd realize that within a second of going outside, my breath, even though I wore masks and all kinds of stuff, my breath would go up and freeze my eyeglasses. So I had to take my eyeglasses off, and then I couldn't see anyway. So, you know, it was bad. Okay, are we at question 5? In 1921, Mongolia celebrated its independence from whom? The answer is China. Just so you know, as an aside, you know, the Mongolians dominated China and pretty much the whole world, the whole known world for many, many years. And then they were dominated by China, and they eventually won their independence with the help of the Bolsheviks in 1921. And that was the beginning of this very special relationship between the Bolsheviks and Mongolia. And Mongolia stayed in the sphere of interest of the Soviet Union until 1991, when they established a democratic state. And it's a wonderful democratic state. It's just a miraculous state in the midst between these two superpowers. Okay, in what century did the great Chingashan create his empire? It was the 1200s, so it was the 13th century. What was the birth name of Chinggis Khan? Does anybody know? Temujin. Who said Temujin? Very good. It's Temujin. Excellent, excellent. That's Temujin. Okay, the president of Mongolia is particularly worried about the loss of these items from Mongolian soil. So what do you think? I haven't heard it yet. It's dinosaur bones. They have the most amazing dinosaur eggs, fossils, dinosaur bones, all in the Gobi Desert. And they're just disappearing because there's no border control, very little export control. And some of these beautiful, beautiful relics of these great archaeological ages are showing up in, you know, Pueblo and places like that. What is the literacy rate in Mongolia? Is it 72%, 88%, or 97%? How many said 72%? How many said 88%? How many said 97%? 97% is correct. This is one of the great contributions that communism made to Mongolian society. They did a lot of really destructive things, particularly regarding their culture. For example, they massacred upwards of 300,000 Buddhist monks and destroyed many, many beautiful, beautiful temples. When you go visit temples, most of them are just shells. And even the name of Chinggis Khan was not allowed to be spoken in Mongolia during the influence of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't actually occupy Mongolia, but they had officials stationed in all of their administrative agencies, and they had about 75,000 troops in Mongolia because Mongolia was considered sort of a bulwark against the Chinese. Okay, what is the Mongolian name for the round houses that Mongolians live in? How many of you said yurt? That would be incorrect. Again, it's a trick question because actually the Mongolians really get offended when you call them yurts because the Mongolian word is ger, G-E-R, ger. And they're wonderful little houses. They're constructed out of felt, and they can be collapsed and transported within an hour. So they're perfect for herding families. I've been in many gers, and they're very comfortable. Usually the outside walls are decorated with beautiful carpets, and in the center there'll be some kind of a stove where all the cooking is done. There's almost never water, and very rarely is there electricity, and whole families, like 15, 16 people, will sleep in one ger. But they are perfect for the nomadic lifestyle. Okay, who's the author of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World? Anybody know? Do you know? Jack Weatherford. You are so right. All right, Jack Weatherford, very good. It's a wonderful book, and there's a wonderful story about this book, which I just want to share with you, and that's that this was a sort of a revisionist view of Chinggis Khan. Instead of just this murderous barbarian that led the hordes, you know, with meat underneath their saddles and killing everybody, the revisionist thing was that he made tremendous contributions to international law. He was the establisher of the principle of diplomatic immunity, and he was very tolerant of other cultures and other religions. He allowed those to flourish if people surrendered to him. So it's a revisionist view. Mongolians were so proud of this book that they had it translated into Mongolian, and they put it on a tape recorder, and they went to 15,000-mile trip around Mongolia, and it's a huge country. It's, you know, it's almost, I think it's half the size or maybe twice the size of Texas, I can't remember which. Anyway, they went around Mongolia, and they played this tape, but where did they play it to? That's such an interesting thing. They didn't play it to people. They played it to the steppes, the trees, the lakes, and this view that finally Chinggis Khan, this great leader, had been recognized as the very wise leader that he actually was. Okay, what percentage of Mongolia's exports go to China? Is it 60, 82, 92, or 98? So how many said 60? How many said 82? How many said 92? How many said 98? The answer is 92%. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. What was the growth rate of Mongolia's gross national product last year? Was it 8%, 12%, or 17%? How many of you thought 8%? How many of you thought 12%? How many of you thought 17%? The answer is 17%. Highest growth rate in the entire world. Now it has slowed down a lot. The first quarter of 2012, it was predicted to remain about 25%, get up to 25% and stay there. But as all of you know, there's a leadership change going on in China. That has destabilized things a little bit. The commodity price of coal, which is their primary export to China, has gone down, and the Chinese economic growth has really slowed down. So Mongolia's growth has slowed down to a mere 13%. Wouldn't we be that lucky? Okay, the national drink of Mongolia is vodka. How many people said true? How many people said false? You are right, it is false. It is called Irag, and it is fermented mare's milk. And I've been trying to describe to people what that tastes like, and the only thing I can say is if you took buttermilk and you mixed it with hard cider, that's kind of what it tastes like. It's not very appealing, and it can make you drunk in a big hurry, and you have to drink it because you'd be considered really rude if you didn't. And then finally, what percentage of Mongolia's petroleum products come from Russia? 50%, 80%, or 100%? How many of you said 50? How many of you said 80? How many of you said 100? And the answer is 100%. So tally up your answers. How many you got right? Okay, how many got 15 right? How many got 14 right? Oh my goodness, have you been to Mongolia? I figured that. Well, I want to give you your prize, which is this pair of mittens, which is, come on up, which is made from recycled sweaters by a woman who's been taken off the streets of Ulaanbaatar who was trafficked.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you learned something from the quiz, and now I'm going to show you some pictures. Okay, first of all, let me tell you what I was doing there. I was on a Fulbright. Fulbright is congressionally funded. It's a program that sends scholars from other countries here, but it also sends our scholars to various countries around the world. Now, why did I pick Mongolia? Well, I looked over the countries that were available, and I don't know, they all seemed so tame. There was, there's Nara, one of my friends from Mongolia. Hi, Nara. So there was Luxembourg, there was Poland, there was tons of China. There were just all kinds of places like that, and I thought, I don't want to go someplace ordinary. I want to go someplace where I can make a difference. And I really didn't know anything about Mongolia. I barely knew where it was, but I competed for it. And, you know, I won it, but I'm not sure how many people actually were competing for Mongolia, to be perfectly honest. But so there it is. And one of the questions I often ask on my trivia quizzes is, how many countries are border Mongolia? And it's only Russia and China. But Kazakhstan is separated just an 18-mile corridor, which is Russian. So you can actually travel over just a very short space and you're into Kazakhstan. And you can see Mongolia is the chairman of the Council of Landlocked Countries, because landlocked countries have some very, very special challenges. And one of the challenges is that you can't get anything in and you can't get anything out easily. They desperately want to have access to seaports, but to do that, they have to go through Russia, they have to go through China. And so they're really in a very, very precarious position. And it's very interesting how they've negotiated this position, what they've decided to do as a country. So let's see a couple more pictures here. So you can see Ulaanbaatar. Ulaanbaatar is with the red star. I was in Ulaanbaatar practically the whole time, and you know, usually when people go on Fulbrights, they get to go all over the place, and but I pretty much stayed right in that city because it turned out that my university really, really needed me. I was at the National University of Mongolia, and I was in the School of Diplomatic Service. I was their first ever Fulbright Scholar. They welcomed me with open arms. They could not have been more hospitable. I taught 175 students. I taught a course in international law for the seniors, and then for juniors, I taught a course in American foreign policy. And I had really high hopes about what I was going to do. You know, I had spent months working on these syllabuses, and within like a week, I realized nobody could speak English. So, you know, I really couldn't do what I had planned to do, so I had a translator, one of my very intelligent, well-traveled students who had been to the United States. If I got to complicated things, they would translate for me. And I really had to water down what I was doing. But I finally figured out that I wasn't really there to teach American foreign policy. What I was really there for was just to let them learn a little bit about the United States and for me to learn a lot about Mongolia, and that's exactly what happened. Now, if you see the Gobi Desert down there, the Gobi Desert is where all this mineral wealth that you are hearing about in Mongolia is found. The second largest copper gold mine in the world is located there, and they are just opening the largest coal mine in the world, also very close to that copper gold enterprise. Then up along the west border is the Altai Mountains, or the Altai Mountains. They're beautiful mountains. They're very tall, they're very rugged. And Mongolia is the sparsest populated country in the world. I mean, it has 3.2 million people, and half of those live in the capital city. Half of them live in Ulaanbaatar. I didn't get up to the north, but many people do. This Hoyskal Lake up there is a popular spot to go. Once you get out of the city of Ulaanbaatar, the roads are all dirt or across the steppes. You just barely even can see a track. There are very, very few paved roads. But the Gobi Desert is becoming very, very built up now. And a lot of interesting questions about that in terms of the watershed down there, because there's no water in the desert. So when they find water, they essentially take it away from the herding people. There's a lot of conflict about that. Okay, so this is about a week before I came home, and I'm still wearing my bulky coat. But that's what UB looks like. I'm standing up on a very tall monument, which is to the Russians that helped save them from the Chinese. And I'm looking out over UB. UB is a much bigger city than I thought it was going to be. It has over 1 million people in it. And you can't really see real clearly, but crawling up the hills are the Ger districts. And the Ger districts are the herders. A couple of years ago, there was a terrible famine and a freeze, and about 20% of Mongolia's livestock was lost. And these herders all had to come into the city, and there's no employment for them. Unemployment is about 35 to 40%. And they live in these Ger districts, and they're very, very poor. And it really is a huge problem. It's one of the things that contributes to the terrible pollution, because in the Gers, they burn plastic bottles, or they burn charcoal, or they burn whatever they can find. So when you wake up, and I'm an asthmatic, and nobody told me this before I left for Mongolia, but when you wake up, you almost have to push aside the particulates because it's just so incredibly polluted. You wheeze the whole time. I think it's a lot like what you saw Beijing was during the Olympics. Okay, that's a Ger, and that's in their national park, which is very beautiful. There are many national parks, and wherever there's a Ger, you're going to see horses, and you're going to see at least one dog, although you can't see one there, but I'll show you some later on. Okay, this was, when I got there was a holiday called, what's that holiday, Nara? Tsaransar? Yeah, Tsaransar, which is a holiday where you go visit all your families and all your relatives, and you visit 13, 14 people in one day, and you have to drink ayag at every single place. I had a colleague, her name was Basha. She was really funny. She was this little short, plump gal who specialized in Russian, but her relatives lived in this Ger. It had no sanitation, didn't even have an outhouse. You just had to go back in the bushes if you had to go. But it was so cold. I can't even tell you how cold it was. You would walk on top of the snow and you'd feel the cold come all the way up your body. And then looking out, that's Ulaanbaatar, and you can see how cold it is and the snow on all the mountains. Okay, so here's a contrast, right? So this is the Mongolian People's Party building. It used to be the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party. It was the Communist Party. But in the 2008 elections, this building was burned down. Not this building, but the building that was there before was burned down. and then they built it up. This is still one of the two most powerful political parties in Mongolia. There's a Democratic Party and the Mongolian People's Party. It's very similar to what you see in other transitional societies where some of the apparatchiks, the very wealthy people under the old Soviet system, just changed their colors and they became involved in buying up all the leases and the licenses and the businesses, and they became some of the political leaders in the new Mongolia. Now, they just had elections in June. The elections went off very, very well. The Democratic Party won the plurality, but had to form a coalition government with a couple of minor parties. You can't get in there. I mean, I tried to go in a couple times because I wanted to see it, but they won't let you anywhere in there. But it's quite a striking, beautiful building. And this is what I really loved about Mongolia. It's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous out in the countryside. This is the Tuli River, which eventually gets down to Ulaanbaatar. And that's what steppes look like. I mean, there's just nobody anywhere. You can literally ride for a day and not see anybody. The herders pick up their gears. They go with where the climate takes them, where the herds take them. They have a very famous tradition of hospitality, and that has come into the city as well. If a herder is going out of his ger and his family is out of the ger, they will leave the ger completely open with food, so any traveler can come and sleep in the ger, can eat their food, and then just leave, and every single ger around the countryside is open like that. And it's just a wonderful tradition. There aren't very many nomadic cultures that are still around the world today, but this is a genuine one, and there's a lot of feeling. They hate to see this culture being disrupted by some of the changes that are taking place. This is a tourist camp. If you go to Mongolia, you're very likely to stay in a camp like this. You won't have indoor facilities in all likelihood, but you'll stay in very attractive gers with beautiful mountains in the background, and you can just walk out there in the fields and pet the horses. This is Chingashan and the extent of his empire. This is his court portrait, and you can see how far his empire went. It went all the way over to Korea, to Hungary, up into Russia, down almost into India. Very, very extensive empire, and they are incredibly proud of this. And you all know what this is. This is the Great Wall. Do you know what it was built for? It was built to keep the Mongols out. Okay, here's another picture of UB, so you can see kind of what it looks like. And one of the first things you see when you get off the airport is these huge power plants. They're two big ones that produce most of the power. I will say the power there's lots of things that are very inconvenient about Mongolia, wouldn't you say? I got stuck in an elevator 9 times. The first time was the very first day I was there. I went down, I was staying in an apartment, I was on the 9th floor, I went down, I came back to go up to my apartment, got in the elevator, and pushed the button, and everything went black. And I couldn't see anything. I mean, I had a little LED light on my keychain, and I was stuck there for 20 minutes. And after that, I quickly learned the word help in Mongolia, but nobody really hears you. And that happened 9 times to me. And you'll be right in the middle of working on your computer, and all the power will go out, and it'll be a rolling blackout in Ulaanbaatar that's going to last 3 days. So there goes that project. And I never had hot water the whole time I was there, the whole semester. And so I cut my hair really, 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 really short so I could lean forward in my little sink, and I had a little electric hot water heater, and I would pour boiling water in, and I would wash my hair that way. But when I got to the Incheon airport, I didn't care whether I had to pay $149. I went to that transit hotel, and I just stood in that hot shower. It was just really fabulous. Okay, this is kind of a fun story. So, as I said, the Soviets didn't like Mongolia, talking a lot about Genghis Khan. So very shortly after their independence in 1991, one of their very, very wealthy politicians, he was judo. He was a judo athlete. I think he was the national champion, but he had gotten in on all these industrial enterprises. He was just loaded with money, and he decided to build this statue to Chinggis Khan. And this is about an hour outside of Ulaanbaatar. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's the largest equestrian statue in the world, and it's really tacky. On the bottom are these restaurants and museums, and then you go in, and there you can rent Mongolian costumes and dress up and get your picture taken, all that kind of stuff. And then you can go up to the horse's head and look out over the steppes. And he, by the way, is facing China. And wait till you see Chinggis Khan's look. What do you think? I mean, he does not, he's just saying, China, you just stay away, right? But the really funny thing is that to get up to the head of the horse, you have to go right up through the horse's ass. Okay, here are my students. I absolutely adored my students. I have so many names on Facebook, I can't even tell you. I don't even know how to do Facebook, but they're all populating my Facebook. They're just wonderful, wonderful kids, eager to learn, bright, all of them very patriotic. They were all seniors in college, seniors and juniors in college. A lot of girls, 70% of the college population in Mongolia is female. And a very interesting thing about my students was the first exam I gave them. Colonel Kearney knows this story. So they had a very crowded room, one tiny little blackboard that didn't take the chalk very well, no textbooks, no paper, no pencils, nothing like that. So I basically was just teaching them stuff, but I had a midterm exam. So I put it face down on their desks, and I said, okay, turn it over, you may begin now. So they turned it over, and the cheating began. Everybody had notes written on their palms, pulled out notes, talked to their neighbors, opened their cell phones, opened their computers. There was just, everyone was cheating. And I just started to laugh because I had never seen anything like that in my life. Coming from the Air Force Academy, they just don't do that, So I actually ended up sending emails to my colleagues at the Air Force Academy. I said, what should I do, And, well, my brother had a suggestion. He said, take one of them out in the courtyard and shoot him. But I wasn't going to do that. So what I did was gave a take-home exam for the next exams. And that worked really well. I said, you can talk to whomever you want. You can look at whatever you want, but when you write your exam, that should be your own work. I'm sure it wasn't, but, and so they did a pretty good job, actually. They did a pretty good job. The other little cheating story I had was kind of interesting was I read 2 master's theses. And it was time to grade them and time to say whether I was going to pass them forward or not. Why is this not working? Is it working? Okay. So I'm getting ready to issue these grades. One was going to get a D because it was really bad, and one was going to get a B. And the secretary came in. There were 9 of us sitting around in a room. We all sat around and had small little desks and stuff. And she had this pile of money that was about this high. And she said, here, Fran, here's your money. I said, what's that for? She said, well, that's from the students for reading their master's theses. I said, I can't take that. And she said, why not? And I said, well, we just don't do that in the United States. It's part of my job. Well, apparently in Mongolia, if you give this much money, you get an A. If you give this much money, you get a B. If you give this much money, you get a C. And I have to tell you, it took about a week before my fellow professors would speak to me because by my refusing to take that money, that called into question what they were doing, and that was big income for them. So it was very eye-opening. Okay, this is, I lived right around here. This is a central square called Sukhbaatar Square. These is like the Royal Guard. They're dressed up in their beautiful Mongolian uniforms. In there is a seated Chinggis Khan, and that's the Parliament building. It's very beautiful, And this is about Mongolians' natural resources, which is very, very interesting. You can see Oyu Tolgoi, which is the copper gold mine. Oyu Tolgoi means turquoise hill. That's how they learned that there was copper and gold there, because the hill was turquoise looking. And so they started to dig, and there was all this copper. Incredible, incredible resources, among the most abundant in the entire world. And it's really an interesting question how Mongolia is going to handle these resources. Their first try at it was to have leases to all these countries and companies that were rooted in other countries. Then they would own 34% of those companies, and they would get 57% of the profits of those countries. So then what they did was, I think this is a remnant of the old Soviet days, they gave every single Mongolian citizen a monthly stipend, like 16,000 tugruks, or for students it was 21,000 tugruks. So everybody got all this money, and most people had absolutely no idea what to do with it. And that now has been rescinded, and they're not going to do that anymore. What they're going to do now is have what they call a sustainability fund, where they put the Mongolian profits into a fund which is going to help build needed infrastructure, school, and health facilities in the country. Just one little interesting thing about Mongolia and China, since we're talking about between the two superpowers. I should have given you the caveat that I'm not an expert on Mongolia. I was there for 4.5 months. There are other people in this room who probably know a lot more than I do, so mine is very anecdotal. But Mongolians in general hate the Chinese. They have all these little stories about the Chinese. It's part of their culture. Like, if somebody has a stomach ache, they'll say, "I have a really bad stomach ache. I ate Chinese food last night." Or they'll say, "The Chinese are hiding in caves in the hills, and they are kidnapping all our dogs, and they're going to eat all our dogs." And they really believe that. They really believe that. So how does it affect what they're doing? Well, they are extremely worried that this rapacious China that's so hungry for energy is going to just dominate them and take all their resources and, plunder what they have, and they will it'll sort of be a neo-colonial state in a way, neo-imperialism. They're very, very worried about that. So how does that manifest itself? Well, some of you have traveled on the rail in Mongolia, and there are two gauges. There's the Russian gauge. When you take the Trans-Mongolian Railroad, it's the Russian gauge. And then if you want to take it to Beijing, which is about 380 miles from the Mongolian border, you have to stop, and they change the gauges, and you get onto the Chinese gauge. So the question was, as they're developing all this copper and gold and this huge coal, you see Tavan Tolgoi, that's going to be the largest coal mine in the world, and that's what China really wants. And they need to build infrastructure, so where are they going to build the railroad? Well, it's very, very interesting. They have chosen, the parliament has chosen, to go all the way up the east side of Mongolia into Russia, all the way up to Vladivostok, instead of going through China. That's how worried they are. And they're also worried because I'm sure you've heard of Inner Mongolia. Well, there are more Mongolian people living in Inner Mongolia in China than there are in Mongolia. And they get so angry when the Chinese call them Outer Mongolia. And they feel that China marginalizes the Inner Mongolians. So they're very, very, very worried about China. This actually was constructed, I believe, by China. And another example, anecdotal, my students would say, "Oh, yeah, it was funded by China, but it's falling down. It's not well made. It's structurally very, very bad." And no student would take me into that building. Okay, here are what the mines look like. Again, very problematic, how they're going to take those profits from this, incredible resource and help the Mongolian people. And it's just raping the landscape. It's destroying the old herding communities, because those herding communities don't have fences, they don't have borders, they don't have titles to property. They just roam. And so when you take this land and you develop it, and this one mine, the coal mine, is going to employ 60,000 people, it's like a city. So it really is a big question about Mongolian culture. So Mongolian is Buddhist. It's half Buddhist and half shamanistic, and one other religion, which you probably haven't heard of. But that's the temples are in great disrepair, and it's a shame because they're so incredibly beautiful. And many little boys end up being lamas for a certain period of time. And the other thing that they worship, it's called Tengrin. It's the worship of the blue sky. And I thought that was really beautiful. On all the mountaintops, you'll see these piles of stones. And if you walk around them 3 times and place a stone, you'll get blessings on someone whom you have in your heart. So you see black silk, blue silk everywhere. Now this is what really ticks the Chinese off. They might not get the leases they want, they might not get the licenses they want, they might get snubbed occasionally by the Mongolians, but this is what really gets them, the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama has implied that the next Dalai Lama will come from Mongolia, and he likes to visit Mongolia, and every time he comes, the Chinese are apoplectic. They are so apoplectic that the last time he came, they closed the border for 3 days. Now that might not seem like much, but when you have 98% of your exports going through that border and a ton of your imports coming in, especially your food, that's a big deal. Here's what also really got the Chinese mad. Not only did the Dalai Lama come, but he was going to speak in this sports arena that was built by the Chinese. So they did not like this, and they put so much diplomatic pressure on the Mongolian government that they had to move that speech away. For the first 10 years after 1991, Russia ignored Mongolia. They were kind of snubbing them because they had decided to go the democratic route and disengage from the Soviet bloc. But then about 10 years after independence, Putin visited, and he has been a regular visitor ever since. And there you have Hillary Clinton, who visited right after the Mongolian elections, congratulating them. And you can see she's down here on the square I was telling you about. So this was very recent. In 2005, George W. Bush visited. Do you know why? Because Mongolia was the first country to join the Coalition of the Willing. Isn't that interesting? They have had troops in Iraq and troops in Afghanistan. And if you don't think that's difficult, when you're trying to establish where you are between these 2 superpowers, both of whom really don't want you to be associated with the United States, we've tried to give them as much support as we can. There you have Joe Biden. Happy Joe. He basically just got off the plane and met a few camels and got back on plane. But everybody loved him. They really loved him a lot. Apparently, he's quite jolly. So here is some cultural events. This is called a horsehead fiddle, and beautiful folk festivals and singing. There's something called the long song, which are very long, screechy songs. And then there's the tuba singing. Have any of you heard the throat singing? It's really pretty amazing singing. And then they love masks, and they love their horses. Everywhere you go, there are horses, and the horses, when they have a love song, it's not to their girlfriends, it's not to their wives, it's to their horse. It's so funny. Okay, why is that not going? Move the cursor. How about that? All right. Okay, this is one of my favorite pictures. I took this the second day I was in Mongolia, and it's just so typical. The ground was completely frozen, but looking up on the horizon, some students were taking me out into the countryside, these beautiful, beautiful horses and riders. They love their horses so much that in this one village where I visited, they had this race, and when the horse won, the one that won the race had the distinction of having his head cut off and you can see the most recent winner there. This is behind a temple, and he's venerated for generations to come. What I love best about Mongolia, I love the people. The children are simply absolutely beautiful, and as you can see, she has on what I have on. When I was leaving, one of my colleagues who was quite poor, because they make maybe $15,000 a year, maybe, and he was a full professor, and he asked what I would like as a goodbye gift, and I just didn't want to ask for anything, and so this is what he gave me. He had this made for me, which was really nice. That is one fat Mongolian baby. The Mongolian women in particular are absolutely beautiful. I mean, I was there with my big down jacket. My office gave me a commie hat it was green, and I had Smurf boots that came up to here. I looked ridiculous. And every Mongolian woman looks gorgeous all the time. I don't know how they do it. These are just waitresses. So that's just the landscape. As you can see, they've carved out a little area, and they're going sledding there. And this is probably the most famous natural landmark in Mongolia. It's called Turtle Rock, and it looks shaped just like a turtle, and everybody's out there. When the weather gets nice, you spread out your blankets and cut up your apples. That's really nice. And there's me terrified of a giant eagle. The Kazakhs bring in their giant eagles, and for a little bit of money, you can give them, you can have the eagle sit on your arm. And he was really heavy, and he really wanted to eat my hair. And I have lots of pictures of him, but that's the best one. And lots of camels. And this is why everybody cheats, which is interesting. This is the Mongolian culture. This was hanging in my first apartment, and this is the most famous Mongolian folktale, which is of a fruit tree, and an elephant, a monkey, a bunny, and a bird. And in order for them to all avail themselves of the fruit, they have to cooperate. So I guess that's why they all cheated. Okay, there's my friend's house again, the ger, and you can see there's the dog. As a matter of fact, the greeting when you go to a ger is called hold the dog. It's not hello, it's hold the dog. This is what will greet you when you go to a holiday, Tsaransar. In the middle of a table of every single house you get to, there's some kind of a roast sheep, and then there's bread and some yogurty kinds of milk curds, lots of vodka, and they will also have milk tea, and they'll also have the fermented mare's milk. This was, again, that same holiday, very humble abode. Here's the kitchen where they're making the food, very simple. There's the outhouse that I had to use. And there's my colleague's wife he's the one who gave me this. And this food I really liked. These are pastries, and there's meat inside of them, and they're steamed, and they're quite good. And this I took because it's a very wealthy household I visited, and this young man was studying in China, so he had a long pigtail. He wanted to be a rock star, but I really took it so you could see the sheep butt. So there's a sheep butt, and because I was the guest of honor, they would slice off these slabs of fat, and if they really like you, they give you the fat and no meat at all. So what I did was I very soon asked people to send me plastic bags, which I couldn't find in Mongolia. So I had a lot of plastic bags, and I got to be very good at slipping the fat into my plastic bag so I wouldn't have to eat it because I just didn't want all that fat. And here's another, you know who hot Mongolian barbecue down at, okay, well, that's not Mongolian barbecue. This is Mongolian barbecue. This is a sheep's head there, and you eat the brains, you eat the tongue, you eat everything. And people took me there to be really nice to me. As I said, they really were very hospitable. So anyway, so what did I do with all this fat that I stored in my plastic bags? Well, Mongolia has this incredible population of dogs, and by the time I left outside my hotel room, I had 24 dogs who waited for me every morning, so I would give them whatever remnants of my fat was still left. Okay, that just shows you some of the Gare districts. And Mongolia is, in spite of the fact that there are some of the richest people in the world, driving Hummers, Rolls Royces, Bentleys, that they shop at Louis Vuitton, places I could never set foot into. There are some really humble places. This was the husband of a friend of mine. He started his own machine shop. Very enterprising young man, worked probably 18 hours a day. And right outside his door, this is where someone lives. You can see piles of rubble, typical apartment buildings, and the necessary dog. Do you see the necessary dog? And this is one of the things that's really sad about Mongolia. One of the other legacies of Russia is alcoholism. And you'll walk down the street, and someone once said to me, you know, if somebody had a heart attack and was fallen down on the street, they probably would never be rescued because there are so many people who are drunk who are just lying all over the place. And it's a huge family problem, a huge social problem. When they get these handouts from the government, they just go spend it on the vodka. And it's really very sad, huge problem with domestic violence. This is looking out of my hotel room. There are 2 people sleeping there. This is about the end of March, so it's still very, very cold. And of course, the necessary pile of rubble. Now this, the young man who got the mittens. This is a nonprofit called Streams in the Desert. If any of you, by the way, at the end, I'll put addresses of these up there. But this woman was a Peace Corps volunteer from Minnesota. And she got to Mongolia and never wanted to leave. And she became very interested in the problem of trafficking. There's a really big trafficking problem into China because, of course, China has been eliminating a lot of their baby girls. And so they use Mongolian women and trafficked girls, and they take them to China, and it's very hard to ever get them back, especially to Macau for some reason. But she started, this is just a couple of rooms. She has the Streams in the Desert where she rescues some of these trafficked women. And there's one of the gals that she's rescued, and she trains them with sewing and jewelry making. And one of the things they do is they reclaim sweaters. And if any of you have sweaters, you can send them all to Streams in the Desert, and they will make mittens and sell them. This is another one of the women's nonprofits. This is a gal named Selenge who's an attorney, and she was visiting Seattle and just loved patchwork quilting. She thought, well, why couldn't I train the Mongolian women to do patchwork quilting and with traditional Mongolian designs and then sell those? So that's what she does, and she takes in victims of domestic violence and trains them. Interesting, she sent out this email to the whole world that said, please come help teach my girls how to do quilting. She got people from the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, Scotland. They all came over and they, on their own dime, and they trained all these women, and they make the most beautiful, beautiful quilting projects. And that's her little quilting shop. Typical apartment building. And then this is just going to wrap up my little talk. You see the manhole there? Okay, this is right outside of my apartment building. My first apartment building that's the one I was up 9 floors. Unfortunately, one night I had 2 guys who tried really hard to get into it and were sawing through my deadbolt. And so in the morning I had to leave and I went to the hotel. But throughout the whole city you have these manholes. And what I found out was that there's this subterranean netherworld there where many, many, many children live. Children who are abandoned, neglected, who have parents that can't look out for them. And it's warm down there, so that's why they go down there. There's a little boy. This picture was taken by Nara. Nara is the establisher of the nonprofit called Care for Kids Worldwide, and she subsidizes a lot of the shelters that take these children out of the manholes and give them an education and a warm place to sleep. This is my visit to Nara's shelter, and this is the community that it's in. There's a little boy, and his way of earning is just by selling bottles, only for a penny or 2. But here's this incredible bright ray of hope, and this is this shelter. It has no running water, but it's very clean. Very dedicated women, Mongolian women who run it, and just wonderful kids. And I had asked for people to send me lots of gifts to take to these kids. And that was really the best day. I took some of my students with me. It was the best day I had in Mongolia. So here's the little boy who greets me. And just the cutest thing ever. He followed us all around. And these are my students and some of the children in the shelter. And we brought panda bears and jewelry and stickers and books and crayons. And this little girl, I could not get her to smile, the one on the left-hand side. She mostly was crying. And this little boy, again, he got his Spider-Man stickers, and he was just so happy. I think it was the first gift he had ever gotten in his life. And it was just really, really heartwarming. And this is one of Nara's photos. These children are all Mongolian orphans. And these are some pictures of what I'll remember about Mongolia. Beautiful, wild horses, gorgeous terrain, horses in the snow, beautiful, beautiful children. Little goats. Wise faces. And that's the final picture, is this little girl looking out to Mongolia's future. So that's all I have for you. What time is it? It's 7:15. If you have any questions or comments, I do want to tell you that this is Nara's organization. She's here today. Are you going in March, Nara?
Yes.
She's going to Mongolia in March, so if any of you want to send things over with her, you can talk to her later. But these are the other nonprofits I was talking about, Streams in the Desert, Mongolian Patchwork Cooperative. They all have websites in case you're interested in learning more about those. Does anybody have any questions?
What's the seasonality of Mongolia?
Well, it's cold, getting cold now, because I've been hearing from all my students. From about June, July, and August, it's nice. I mean, if you're going to go, that's when you should go. The rest of the time, it's frozen. I mean, it's really, really cold. Yes?
What's their language? I noticed you had Cyrillic alphabet on a lot of the signs. Is it a Slavic language or?
Actually, they use the Cyrillic alphabet, but there's a movement underway now to return to the old Mongolian alphabet, because almost, they use the Cyrillic under the Russian, but it's actually, as I understand it, it's a Turkic language. It's very hard to learn, at least. My father was a linguist, and I'm pretty good with languages, but I really had trouble with Mongolian. Perhaps Nara can tell you how to say thank you, because I never mastered it. I'll say it, and then I'll have her say it. Bayarla.
Bayarsa. You did perfect.
No, it wasn't. Say it again. You see how she said Bairchla? It's a different sound than anything we have. Anybody else? Yes.
Because it is so sparsely populated in such a large country, and most of the people live in Ulaanbaatar, I think you said it's the second most polluted country. Why is the rest of the country so polluted? Is it just because of the mining, or?
I think it's probably because of the inversions and because of the mountain basins that keep the pollution close to the ground, which I think is kind of what you find in Mexico City too. When you go to Mexico City, it's surrounded. Yeah, I mean, the pollution is, nobody told me about the pollution. I was really, really surprised. There were days when people, colleagues had to leave the school and just go home with a wet handkerchief over their mouths because they simply couldn't breathe. And I had a couple of times when I had pretty bad asthma attacks. And that kind of reminds me of talking about the health situation there. You don't want to get sick in Mongolia because if something serious happens to you, if you're rich, if you're a foreigner, you're going to be on the next plane out and you're going to go to either Beijing or you're going to go to Seoul because the health system is just not good. That's one of the things that they're really hoping that they can improve with this sustainability fund from the mineral resources that they have. They call their foreign policy, they have a first neighbor, second neighbor, Russia and China, and we are the third neighbor. Psychologically, they want to be linked to us because that's where their values are. They hate the Chinese. They tolerate the Russians, and some of them like the Russians, actually, because they think the Russians saved their country from the Chinese. So they have a lot of appreciation for them. As far as cuisine goes, there are lots and lots of restaurants, every ethnicity you'd want. Tons of North Koreans in Mongolia, tons of them. I went to a cashmere factory, and it was all North Korean women. And I think that's a very neglected opportunity because they were the first country to recognize North Korea. And they've maintained very good relations with both North and South Korea, and yet they are kept out of all the peace talks, and I don't know why, because they would be very good at facilitating, some kind of moderation of North Korea's policies, I think. Yes?
What's the infant mortality rate?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's probably pretty high. Yeah, pretty high. Literacy rate is good. Yeah.
How they have such a high literacy rate with so many nomads?
The Russians tried to impose a communal system. They took away some of the herders' herds, and they tried to organize everybody into schools and things like that. And the result was this high literacy rate. But the other result is the high vodka rate, which is really kind of sad. When you have a faculty meeting, it's very interesting. You sit down at your desk with all your colleagues, and they have 7 or 8 bottles of vodka on the table. And by the end of the faculty meeting, they are all empty. And everybody's getting along really great, So no faculty disagreements there. I actually brought my boss, who's sitting back there, I brought her a bottle of vodka and said maybe we should try it. Anybody else? How many of you want to go to Mongolia? Yeah. If you go in June. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you all and seeing some of my old friends. And please say hello to Nara. She's from Castle Rock. She's married to an American, and she's doing amazing, amazing things to help the people of Mongolia.
Thank you, Fran. Let's give Fran a big hand. Wonderful, wonderful.